He said it would just be a signature. One scribble, one harmless line on the dotted page. No commitments, no risks. Just a formality. That's what my son told me 2 years ago in the cramped back room of his office, wedged between his faux leather desk chair and a filing cabinet that never closed all the way. I still remember how his voice softened when he asked, like I was some fragile relic from another century. "Mom, it's just for the lease," he said. "They want a cosigner with good credit. It's not a big deal." He even smiled, that familiar half-smirk he inherited from his father, the one that used to melt me when he was a boy asking for an extra cookie or a late bedtime. It didn't melt me anymore. Still, I signed. Back then, I wanted to believe in him. A mother doesn't stop hoping, even after the signs are clear. I told myself that Marcus just needed time, that the failed landscaping business wasn't a reflection of his character, just a product of bad luck and worse timing, that his divorce hadn't hardened him, just made him more driven. I was wrong on all counts, but it would take time for the weight of that wrongness to settle in. For now I sat across from him, clutching my purse with both hands as he slid the contract across the desk. "See," he said, tapping the space beside his own messy signature. "Just a formality." My pen moved like it had a mind of its own, and with that, my name became the lifeline to a dream I didn't own.
So,
I didn't visit the office much after that. Marcus said he had everything under control. He hired a girl named Bree to answer phones, a man named Kellen to manage the trucks, and he started dressing like he'd made it, shoes that shined too much, shirts with collars that looked stiff enough to crack. "I'm building something real this time," he told me over coffee one morning. "Not like before." I nodded, smiled, paid for his croissant and latte, while he scrolled through messages on his phone.
still,
The first bill came 3 months later. A gold-trimmed envelope from some bank I didn't recognize. I nearly tossed it, thinking it was another credit card offer, until I saw my name spelled out in full. Annalise Corbin, not Anna like most people called me, but the full name I'd only ever used on legal documents and job applications. Inside was a statement for a credit card I'd never opened. Balance, $6,418.71. I stared at the numbers, lips pressed tight. I didn't panic. Not then. Instead, I folded the statement in half, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it beside the toaster. I didn't want to believe what I already knew. The next envelope arrived 2 weeks later. Different bank, higher balance, same name. That night, I sat in my kitchen with every drawer pulled open, hunting for the paperwork Marcus had asked me to sign. I finally found it tucked inside an old manila folder labeled lease dated. But when I pulled it out, there were more than just lease documents inside. There were 4 separate applications, business credit lines, 2 with my name and social security number typed neatly under guarantor. One had a small sticky note on it in Marcus's handwriting, "Need Mom to sign this tomorrow." But I'd never seen it before. I stayed up until 2 that morning reviewing every line. I checked my credit score online. I made a list of every open account with my name on it. There were 7. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat still, listening to the faint hum of the fridge and the ache in my knuckles as I gripped the armrests of my chair. There's something uniquely cruel about realizing the person you raised, diapers, training wheels, scraped knees and all, has quietly chosen to betray you. I called him the next day, not angrily, just with purpose. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Ma, everything good?" "I need to ask you something," I said. "Did you open credit accounts under my name?" There was a pause, too short to mean panic, too long to be innocent. "Mom," he said, drawing the word out like a sigh, "it's not what you think. I didn't ask why," I cut in. "I asked if you did." Another pause. "Yeah," he finally said, "but it's not a big deal. I've got it handled." I felt something tighten inside me, small and sharp, like a needle threading through my chest. "You have nothing handled," I said, my voice low. "You've built your business on my name." He tried to laugh. "You're being dramatic. I pay the bills. This isn't identity theft. It's family." I hung up. Not out of rage, out of preservation. Because I knew if I stayed on that line another second, I might have said something I couldn't take back. And unlike him, I still cared about what couldn't be undone. That afternoon, I gathered every financial record I had, my bank statements, credit card alerts, those manila folders I hadn't touched since the last time my husband was alive. I laid them out on the kitchen table like pieces of a crime scene, each one whispering, "You were a means to an end." I called a lawyer the next day. Not one of those flashy TV ones. A quiet man named David Norwell who'd helped me revise my will when Gerald passed. He listened carefully as I explained everything. When I finished, he asked me only one question: do you want to press charges, or do you want to make this disappear? I looked him square in the eye and said, I want him to learn what it feels like to lose everything he took for granted. David nodded. Then let's begin. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But not free. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not because I needed to, but because my body had long ago learned that peace was found in stillness, not sleep. I dressed deliberately. No robe, no slippers. I wore the same black blouse I had chosen the day before, the one with the high collar that reminded me of strength, not softness. I combed my silver hair back tight and pinned it beneath my silk scarf, the way my mother used to when she had a hard thing to do. This morning, I had something harder than grief to face. I had a son who would swear he loved me while gutting the life I'd built, and a lawyer waiting for my permission to act. I poured myself a cup of tea and stared at the edges of my kitchen window as the light crept across the counter. The kettle let out its quiet hum. I ignored it. My mind was already elsewhere, sifting through numbers, invoices, signatures that didn't belong to me. Marcus hadn't just used my name. He'd laid a foundation with it, then built a castle of debt. And now I would set fire to the foundation. David Norwell didn't waste time. By the time I arrived at his office later that day, he had a printout of every account linked to my name, flagged in red. He'd also pulled Marcus's LLC records. Your name is listed on all the business filings, he said, sliding the papers toward me. As co-signer, you're liable for a good portion of the debt if he defaults. But if I remove my name, I asked. He nodded. The lenders will likely freeze the accounts. Creditors may call in the debt immediately. Without your credit backing it, the business loses its cushion, fast. I didn't flinch. I'm not looking for revenge, I said, but I want out. I want my name off of every piece of it. You're entitled to do that, David replied, but it's going to hit him hard. He'll survive, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Or he won't. But either way, I'm done playing the fool. David handed me a stack of documents to sign: dissolution forms, notice of withdrawal, a statement of non-consent for all future business obligations, and a certified letter revoking power of attorney that Marcus had slipped into our paperwork years ago, hidden under the pretense of just in case. Each signature I wrote felt like lifting a stone off my chest. By Friday, the first letter had reached Marcus's office. I knew because he texted me. Mom, what is this paperwork? Did you talk to someone? I didn't respond. An hour later, another message. You're making a huge mistake. You don't understand how this works. Just call me, please. Still, I said nothing. I let silence build the boundary he never honored. It had more weight than 1,000 arguments. That afternoon, a manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. I opened it slowly, expecting more bills. Instead, it was a certified statement from the bank holding the largest business credit line, informing me that due to my formal withdrawal of financial consent, the account would be suspended pending verification of assets. Translation: Marcus's lifeline was gone. He came to my house 3 days later. I saw the silver car pull up from the kitchen window. I didn't rush to open the door. I let him knock 3 times before I answered. He stood on the porch like he was visiting a stranger. His face was tight, his jaw clenched too hard, the same face he used to make when he got caught lying about his report cards. Mom, he said, we need to talk. I stepped aside, saying nothing, and let him into the front room. He looked around like he hadn't sat on that very couch 100 times growing up. I'm not mad, he said too quickly, but you could have told me. I did, I replied. You just didn't hear it. He rubbed the back of his neck. I was going to fix it. I had a plan. Marcus, you used my name like it was a spare key. And now that the door's closed, you want to talk about plans? He sighed, dropping onto the arm of the sofa. This isn't just about business. This is our family, our name. No, I said, walking toward the window. It's my name, and I won't let you bury it under a pile of invoices and lies. He went quiet then, looking down at the floor like it might offer answers. They're calling me, he muttered. The vendors, the leaseholder, even the supplier in Raleigh. Everything's frozen. You froze it, I said. I just stepped away. He stood suddenly. You don't get it. You've ruined everything. I turned to face him. You ruined it the day you forged my consent. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The boy I raised flickered somewhere behind his eyes, just for a second, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by the man who thought manipulation was a form of negotiation. Goodbye, Marcus, I said. He didn't say another word. He just walked out, closing the door without force, but without care. I watched his car disappear down the street, then sat back down in the same chair I'd risen from. My legs felt tired, but not weak. I was too old to chase apologies, and too wise to expect them. That night, I moved my documents to a locked box in the hall closet, changed the password on every financial account I had, not because I was scared, but because I was prepared. People think age dulls you, but sometimes it just teaches you where to place the blade. 2 days after Marcus left my house without saying goodbye, a call came from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then another came, same area code, then a third. I didn't answer any of them, but I wrote down each number in the spiral-bound notebook I now kept on the corner of my kitchen table. I wrote the times, too. I wasn't building a case, not yet, but I'd learned the value of a paper trail. That afternoon, while folding laundry, the fourth call came. This one I answered. Something in me whispered, "This one matters." "Mrs. Corbin?" a man asked. His voice was polite but tense. "My name's Harris. I work with Golden Oaks Property Management. You're listed as a co-signatory on the lease for Suite 212, over on Lanford Avenue?" "Yes," I said, slowly. "Well, we've received notice that payment for the last 2 months is delinquent. We attempted to contact Mr. Marcus Corbin, but were referred to you. As the listed guarantor, you're legally accountable for the arrears unless otherwise removed from the lease per contract terms." I took a slow breath. "And how much is owed?" He paused to check. $6,332.47. I closed my eyes for a beat. "I've already submitted a formal revocation of my co-signature to the State Business Registry. You should have received documentation." "I understand," he replied carefully. "But on file, we still have your signature active on the original lease. Without formal amendment by both parties, our contract defaults to the original guarantors." "I see." A silence hung between us. "I'm not paying it," I said finally, "and I suggest your legal department prepare for default." He thanked me, perhaps more out of discomfort than manners, and hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, tea towel still in hand, staring at the old clock above the sink. The hour hand had stopped working months ago. It only moved when nudged. It reminded me of Marcus, stuck in time, unable to move forward unless someone else pushed. Later that evening, I received a message from David, my lawyer. "Marcus filed a complaint with the State Licensing Board. Claims you're sabotaging his business intentionally. Will respond formally tomorrow. Don't worry." I reread the message twice, then turned off my phone and walked into the spare bedroom, the one that used to belong to Marcus when he was in high school. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old dust. I hadn't touched it much in the last 10 years, but that night I opened the closet and pulled out the box labeled College Applications, 1994. Inside were folders of recommendation letters, scholarship essays, and a single acceptance letter from a school he never attended. I unfolded the acceptance letter and stared at it. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was still dark. "Marcus Corbin, welcome to Eastfield College." He never went. Said he didn't want to waste his time chasing degrees he'd never use. He wanted to work with his hands, start something of his own. I'd respected that, back then, but now I realized it had never really been about ambition. It was about control. He didn't want permission, he wanted free rein, and I'd given it to him, over and over, calling it trust. I folded the paper and placed it back in the box, then I locked the closet and left the room. Some stories needed to stay in the dark. Scene. The next morning, I visited the bank. Not for any urgent reason, just to speak to someone face to face. I wanted to review my accounts in person, with a human who might look me in the eye and confirm I still had control. The branch manager, a woman in her 40s with a pressed blue blouse and well-kept nails, welcomed me kindly enough. I told her what I needed: a review of all active credit activity, confirmation of auto-pay settings, and verification that no additional accounts had been opened under my name in the past 90 days. She blinked. "Of course, Mrs. Corbin. Has there been an incident?" "There's been a correction," I said, with a faint smile, "and I want to make sure it stays that way." She printed off a series of pages and went through each line with me, pointing out balances, closing dates, and interest rates. Everything looked clean, at least for now. But when we reached the last page, she paused. "This one here," she said, tapping a line with her pen. "It was paid off in full last week, closed early, balance cleared with a certified check." I leaned in. "By whom?" Name on the check was Marcus Corbin. I raised an eyebrow. "Was it his account?" "No," she said. "The check was issued from an outside account, a business partner maybe, or a personal loan." I leaned back, suddenly understanding he was scrambling, paying off debts, not because he'd taken responsibility, but because he was trying to keep the walls from closing in. "I'd like a printed statement for all closed activity in the past 30 days, I said. She nodded and left briefly to fetch it. While I waited, I stared at the framed photograph behind the teller window. A family of 4, smiling in a wheat field. Probably a stock image, but something about it made my chest tighten. I used to imagine Marcus with a family of his own, a steady job, laughter at Sunday dinners. Now the only thing growing in his fields was interest. When I returned home, a manila envelope was waiting in my mailbox. Inside was a single letter. "To whom it may concern. This letter is to inform you that Marcus Corbin has been removed from all business listings related to Corbin Outdoor Solutions, effective immediately. The company is no longer active. We apologize for any inconvenience." There was no signature, no explanation, just silence. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, folding the letter slowly into fourths. I didn't smile, I didn't cry. The business was gone. Whether he'd shut it down himself or been forced into it, I didn't know, and I didn't care. What mattered was the silence, the absence of his name where it used to be. I unfolded my notebook and added one more entry to the last page. Business dissolved. Silence resumed. No fireworks, just peace. Then I capped the pen and stared out the window, not at anything specific, but into the distance I had finally carved for myself.
Fuck.
The following week passed with a strange kind of stillness. Not peace, not yet, but a hovering quiet that reminded me of the hours after a storm where the trees no longer shake, but their roots still remember. Each morning, I boiled water for tea, cleaned my countertops, and checked my voicemail. No new calls, no more from Marcus. The silence stretched, unbroken, except for the occasional flyer wedged under my front door, or the sound of the neighbor's dog chasing squirrels across the fence. Then, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, my landline rang. Not the cell phone Marcus used to text. This was the house phone, the one I'd kept out of habit, more for memory than for use. I hesitated, something in my chest tightened. "Hello? Mrs. Corbin?" The voice was unfamiliar. Female, younger than me but professional, clipped, alert. "Yes. My name is Dana Pell. I'm a financial auditor, working with TriTrust Holdings. I believe your name came up in a joint filing related to a recent credit dissolution." I sat down slowly. "Go on." She explained, in carefully measured tones, that my name was tied to a subsidiary account Marcus had used for vendor transactions. Apparently, when the business shut down, several invoices remained unpaid, and one client and equipment leasing firm had submitted a complaint. Not to sue, not yet, but to inquire. They're trying to determine who carries liability now that the business no longer exists in name. "I filed to remove my financial participation," I said firmly, 3 weeks ago. "I understand," she replied. "I reviewed your submission myself. It's clear, but the trail doesn't stop with your withdrawal. One of the final transactions was signed using your digital credentials, a closing order for $22,000. I said nothing at first, because I knew what she meant. It wasn't just credit. Marcus had used my login. He must have kept it, those old passwords I never thought to change, the digital keys we used to file taxes when he helped me one year. I felt my stomach drop, not from panic, but from recognition. There was always one more string with Marcus, and he always knew just how far to pull before it snapped. "Are you suggesting I'm responsible for this?" I asked finally. Dana's tone softened. "Not yet, but they'll come knocking, and when they do, you'll want to be ahead of them." I thanked her for her time. She hung up with the kind of careful kindness that only strangers offer when they can't help you. That night, I pulled out the folder I hadn't touched since the week the business closed. Inside were copies of everything David had helped me file. Revocations, disclaimers, time-stamped notices. I had proof. But I didn't have peace. Because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about being erased again. Quietly, strategically, as if my existence were just another placeholder in Marcus's schemes, useful until it became inconvenient. I spent the next morning calling David's office. He was out, but his paralegal assured me they'd follow up. I sent scans. I labeled each file clearly. I created backups. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister. Janine lived 2 states away, in a small house with a screened-in porch and too many cats. We hadn't spoken more than once a year since Gerald's funeral, and even then, it had been mostly holiday formalities. When she answered, her voice was raspy with surprise. "Anna? I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." She laughed softly. "I mean, I was watching a rerun of Jeopardy, but I suppose this is more important." We talked for an hour. Not about Marcus, not at first, but about the past, about the way our mother used to boil vinegar to clean the windows and how we'd both learned to tie scarves by watching old movies. I told her about the garden I never started. She told me about the arthritis creeping into her left knee. Then I told her what Marcus had done. Not the entire story, just the core. She was quiet for a long moment after. "I always thought he was too charming," she said finally, "too smooth. Kids like that, they learn early how to turn guilt into currency." I smiled without meaning to. And mothers are the first banks. Janine didn't offer pity. She offered something more useful. "Whatever you do, Anna, don't let him rewrite your story." That night, I dreamt of Marcus as a child. He was 6, standing at the edge of our yard with a toy plane in his hand, staring at the sky as if he could will it to open. I remember thinking, even then, that he had a hunger too big for his small frame. And God help me, I fed it.
Solo.
2 days later, a letter came. Handwritten, no envelope, folded and dropped through the mail slot like a secret. I recognized the writing instantly, his rushed slant, the slight curve at the top of the M. "You didn't have to go this far. I just needed time. You always overreact. I hope you're happy." That was all. No apology, no truth, just a faint accusation wrapped in resignation. I burned it in a ceramic dish on the back porch, watched the corners curl and collapse into ash. I didn't cry, but I felt something move inside me, a tightness uncoiling, a silence breaking, not because it hurt, but because it no longer could.
Yeah.
The next morning, I went into the spare room and emptied the last box. Inside were old receipts, school certificates, even Marcus's hospital bracelet from the day he was born. I held it in my palm for a long while, then folded it gently and placed it in a small wooden box beside Gerald's watch and a photograph of our wedding day. Some things, I decided, needed to be remembered. Others needed to be released. I locked the box, returned it to the shelf, and walked out of the room without looking back. The morning after I burned Marcus's letter, I rose with the kind of clarity that only comes when something final has been set in motion. The rain had stopped. The wood on the porch was still damp, the smell of soot faint in the air. I didn't sweep it. Let it linger, I thought. Let the ash remind me. There were no calls that morning, no letters, no emails pretending to be civil. The silence felt deeper than before, not just absence, but withdrawal, a kind of retreat on his part, or perhaps regrouping. I wasn't naive enough to believe it was over. Still, I allowed myself 1 full hour to sit at the table and do nothing. No documents, no phone, just tea, and the hum of the refrigerator. I stared out the window at the strip of lawn that hadn't been mowed in 2 weeks. Grass didn't care about timelines, it just kept growing. Then came the knock. Not the doorbell, not the pounding of urgency, just a knock, 3 times, steady, deliberate. I opened the door halfway. A woman stood on the porch. Blonde, slight, well-dressed but understated. She looked like she had been rehearsing something. "Mrs. Corbin?" "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Angela Flores. I used to work with your son." Her tone was gentle, but not pitying. She held a manila folder under one arm and a small leather handbag clutched tight in her other hand. "I won't stay long," she added, "but I think you deserve to see this." I stepped aside. She followed me into the front room and sat without waiting to be offered. Not out of rudeness, out of resolve. People with something difficult to say often sit first, as if to anchor themselves. "I was his operations assistant for about 8 months, she began. "He told people I was a junior partner, but I was never on any paperwork. He asked me to do a lot of tasks that didn't feel legal." She opened the folder and placed it on the table between us. Inside were printed emails, spreadsheets, even a copy of the document Marcus had digitally signed in my name, the vendor payment order Dana had warned me about. I kept backups, she said. He told me to delete them, said they were temporary, but something didn't sit right. I leaned forward and studied the pages, my name written clearly under authorized signer, the timestamp 1 day after I had officially revoked my rights. That's fraud, I said, almost quietly. Angela nodded. I didn't come to cause trouble, but I overheard him on the phone last week. He said you were trying to ruin him, that you'd always been difficult. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. He said I ruined him? Yes, but I think he was just scared, angry at being found out. I sat back and breathed through my nose, steadying myself. I thought you should know, she said again, before he starts trying to spin this somewhere else. Thank you, I said, sincerely. Angela stood, pulling her coat closed. You don't need to worry about me. I'm not part of this anymore. I just wanted you to have truth on your side, in case it gets louder. We didn't shake hands. She simply nodded and left. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt something in my chest, an old, worn anger that didn't explode but simmered, not just at Marcus, but at myself. For too long, I had excused his small transgressions in the name of family. What were a few missed apologies? What was a forgotten birthday? What was asking for money he never repaid? But this wasn't oversight. This was design. I copied every document Angela brought and filed them into my legal binder. I emailed David with the subject line, urgent, proof of forgery. Then I returned to the kitchen and poured the rest of the cold tea down the drain. I wouldn't be finishing it. That weekend, I drove out to the coast. Not far, just a small inlet where Gerald and I once spent a spring anniversary. I didn't pack much, just a change of clothes, a travel mug, and a thick wool coat that still held the scent of cedar from the hall closet. The ocean wasn't loud that day. The tide was low, and the wind moved like it had nowhere to be. I walked the edge of the water, not to find something, but to let something go. I thought of how often I'd put off living for the sake of fixing, how many years I'd spent mending torn seams that were never mine. I picked up a small stone from the sand, held it in my palm, and whispered the words I hadn't yet said aloud. I release you, Marcus, not from consequence, but from me. Then I tossed the stone into the waves. It didn't skip, just sank, and I turned away. Back home, a voicemail waited. From Marcus. His voice was quieter than before, tired. Mom, I heard you went to a lawyer again. Look, I didn't mean for any of this to spiral. You know how things get. Business is messy, but family shouldn't be. A pause. I didn't think you'd go this far. Click. No apology, just disappointment that I had stopped absorbing the cost. I didn't call back. That night, I updated my will, revised the beneficiary details, removed his name, replaced it with one I hadn't spoken in years, a cousin's daughter who once spent a summer reading on my porch while her parents went through divorce. She sent me Christmas cards every year without fail, never asked for anything. Sometimes, the people who expect nothing deserve everything. By Tuesday morning, the revisions to my will were signed and sealed. David didn't ask why I'd removed Marcus. He didn't have to. He'd seen enough mothers do it with clenched jaws and hearts still sore. What surprised him, though, was who I'd chosen instead. Cora Linton, he asked, scanning the line. That's not a name I've seen before. She's family, I said simply. Maybe not by blood, but by attention. He looked up and gave the faintest nod, no judgment, just acknowledgement. That's the kind of lawyer David was, quiet, practical, and merciful in his silence. When I got home, the house smelled of old books and rain. I had left the window open a crack, and the scent of damp leaves clung to the curtains. I didn't mind. It reminded me that the world was still turning, even as old chapters closed behind me. I made myself a sandwich, nothing fancy, just buttered toast and a few slices of cucumber, and sat at the kitchen table. No newspaper, no music, just the sound of my teeth crunching through bread and the wind brushing against the glass. Halfway through the sandwich, my phone lit up. Unknown caller. I stared at it, let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. A man's voice came through, muffled slightly. Mrs. Corbin, my name is Neil Addington. I'm calling from Westbridge Collections regarding a delinquent corporate account linked to Corbin Outdoor Solutions. Do you have a moment to discuss this? Only if you're prepared to be corrected, I replied. There was a short pause on his end. Excuse me? I'm no longer associated with Corbin Outdoor Solutions. As of 3 weeks ago, all legal and financial ties were formally revoked. Any use of my name after that is under review for fraud. So no, Mr. Addington, I won't be discussing a balance that doesn't legally belong to me. Another pause, then the sound of shuffling papers. Is there supporting documentation you'd be willing to send us? It's already been sent, I said, and if you call this number again without reading it, the next communication will come through my attorney. Click. I set the phone down and stared at the ceramic dish by the sink. A tiny crack had started to form along the rim. It wasn't broken yet, but it would be soon. I made a mental note to replace it, then crossed the room and picked it up anyway. That's the thing with cracks. You never stop noticing them once they've begun.
Sakvegelikuit sure Within of the maw.
Later that afternoon, I opened the hallway closet and pulled down a dusty box labeled Marcus, Childhood. I hadn't touched it in years. Maybe not since Gerald passed. Inside were crayon drawings, Mother's Day cards made from construction paper, a half-deflated soccer trophy with his name scratched into the base. I held up one card. On the front, a lopsided heart. Inside, I love you even when you yell about the dishes. I smiled at that just barely. Beneath the cards were photos. Marcus at age 6, his arm around a golden retriever we'd fostered. Marcus in a Halloween costume made of trash bags and duct tape. Marcus at graduation, smiling wide and proud like the world hadn't started biting back yet. I stared at those images for a long time. Then I picked up a small envelope tucked into the corner. It was sealed, no address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, written in Gerald's unmistakable handwriting. Anna, if something ever happens to me, and if you ever find yourself alone, please remember this. Love doesn't mean indulgence. It doesn't mean saying yes when you should say no. We raised Marcus with everything we had, but we cannot carry his choices. We gave him the tools. It's not our fault if he buried them in the dirt and called it farming. Let go of the weight, Anna. He has to build or fall on his own. My eyes didn't water. Not exactly, but my hand tightened around the page, and my breath came just a little shallower. Gerald always saw what I couldn't bring myself to name. He didn't leave instructions, he left permission. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I tucked it between 2 framed photos on the mantel, one of me and Gerald at the beach, the other of the house as it was before Marcus moved back to town. For a while, I just stood there. The silence in the house felt different now. Not empty, but rebalanced. I wasn't grieving the loss of a son. I was grieving the illusion of one. Dives of Morstis. The next morning, I called Cora. Her voice was bright, even over the static of poor reception. Auntie Anna? She said, even though I wasn't her aunt. I'd like to talk, if you've got a moment, I said. Of course. Everything okay? Getting there. I told her I'd updated the will, told her she didn't need to do anything, that I wasn't asking for favors or performance, just recognition. You always made space for me, she said. You let me be a child when everyone else needed me to act like I wasn't hurting. That's what family's for, I replied. Real family, she corrected. We talked for 20 minutes. Nothing about Marcus, just books, the lemon tree she'd been trying to keep alive on her balcony, and a new recipe she found for rice pudding. It was the most peace I'd felt in a conversation in months. Before we hung up, she said, You know you still matter, right? I swallowed once. I do now. The following week passed without disruption. No new calls, no collectors, no mysterious letters slid through the door. Even Marcus seemed to have gone still, like a pond after something heavy drops into it. No ripples, just silence beneath the surface. And yet I couldn't bring myself to trust the quiet. Not yet. Each morning, I moved through my routines, made tea, watered the herbs on the windowsill, read the paper, though some headlines blurred together these days. I kept my documents in order and the lawyer updated, but more than anything, I waited for what? I wasn't sure. Then Thursday came. It started like any other day until a pale blue sedan pulled into my driveway just past noon. I stood at the front window, tea in hand, watching the car idle before the engine cut. The door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, dark jacket, folder under his arm. He looked like someone who delivered bad news before. I didn't go to the door until he knocked. When I opened it, I stepped out first, onto the porch, not inviting him in. Mrs. Corbin, he asked. Yes. My name's Joel Levin. I'm with the Regional Fraud Unit at Mid-South Credit. We've been reviewing a complaint regarding financial activity involving your identity. There it was, the weight I'd been anticipating. I'm aware of the issue, I said. My attorney has submitted documentation of fraud and misrepresentation. You should have received it. He nodded, flipping open the folder. We have. However, some of the flagged activity predates your formal revocation of responsibility, and your name remains connected to several account transitions that occurred under shared access credentials. I said nothing, just stared at him. I'm not here to accuse you, he added, but I do need to ask a few clarifying questions, if you're willing. I'll answer what I can. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. Did you at any point authorize Marcus Corbin to act on your behalf in financial decisions related to Corbin Outdoor Solutions? No, I said. He presented a document years ago, under the guise of assisting with lease paperwork. I now believe that document was misused. Were you aware of the digital authorizations that allowed access to vendor portals and purchasing platforms? He helped me file taxes once, set up accounts. I didn't know he saved those credentials. Joelle scribbled a note. Are you able to verify that you did not complete the March 18th transaction involving equipment liquidation? I felt a flicker of warmth behind my eyes, rage trying to disguise itself as shame. I was never notified about it, I said, nor was I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, then, finally, nodded. Understood. He closed the folder. I'm not here to frighten you, he said again. We've seen this pattern before. Family relationships can be complicated, especially when finances get layered in. Most people don't expect betrayal to come from the people who share their last name. No one expects it, I replied, but many of us learn how to survive it. He offered me his card. I'll do what I can to ensure your liability is reclassified. But if there's any remaining access Marcus might still have to accounts, email systems or data, change them immediately. I already have. He smiled faintly. Then you're ahead of most. He left quietly. No fanfare, just a quiet door latch and the slow turn of tires over gravel as he pulled away. I watched the car until it disappeared down the street. Then I went inside and stood in the hallway, breathing. Not panicked. Not shaken. Just tired. That evening, I opened my laptop. There was one account I hadn't touched yet. A digital document storage Marcus helped me set up, a shared cloud folder we once used for taxes and insurance forms. I hadn't logged in since before Gerald died. The password took 3 tries. When it opened, I found everything, PDFs of my signature scanned onto forms I'd never seen, invoices I never authorized, even personal notes Marcus had written to himself. One stood out. Mom won't do anything. She never does. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't part of a file, just typed in a blank document. 7 words. I read them 3 times. Then I selected the entire folder and deleted it. I emptied the trash. Then I logged out. Then I closed the laptop. But I couldn't shake those 7 words from my mind. Because he was right. For a long time, I hadn't done anything. I let myself be used. I gave the benefit of the doubt until it cost me peace. Later that night, I stood at the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair back beneath the scarf. My reflection was steady, but unfamiliar, not because age had crept in, but because I was no longer performing anything, no more pretending not to notice, no more shrinking in the name of love. I thought of something Gerald used to say when we were younger. There's a difference between being gentle and being soft. I never fully understood what he meant until now. The next morning, I walked to the notary's office and had every remaining account affidavit re-stamped. I carried with me a small packet labeled Final Corrections. Inside were clean versions of every document where my name had once been attached to Marcus's fraud. I left a copy with David and another at the credit union. The last, I placed in the fireproof safe under my bed. And with that, there was nothing more for him to take. It was Sunday when the email came. I wasn't expecting anything. I had already filed and finalized every correction, every revocation, every statement that could be stripped clean of Marcus's fingerprints. The week had been quiet, almost heavy in its silence, like a room after all the guests have left and the chairs still remember their weight. The email subject line read, "Request for conversation, Marcus." I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there, glowing faintly at the top of the inbox while I cleared the teacup from breakfast and folded the dish towel over the oven handle. I watched a squirrel chase its tail across the back fence. I wiped crumbs I couldn't even see off the counter. Eventually, I sat down and clicked. Mom, I don't know what else to say that I haven't already said. I messed up, I know that. But you didn't have to destroy everything. You didn't have to make it public. You've embarrassed me. You've humiliated me. All I ever did was try to make something of myself. And yeah, maybe I took shortcuts, but you always told me to figure things out, didn't you? I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to stop. Please, just stop. Let me fix this without the whole world watching. You got what you wanted. You're not tied to me anymore. Isn't that enough? Marcus. I read it twice, and the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. Not even betrayal. What I felt was something colder, detachment. A space that used to ache, now scarred over so cleanly it almost startled me. His words weren't an apology, they were the same brand of self-pity I'd heard since he was 15 and failed a test he never studied for. I replied only with this. Marcus, this isn't about embarrassment, it's about accountability. And if you think the world is watching, that says more about your guilt than it does about me. Take care of yourself. Mama. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. Not out of frustration, out of completion. There was nothing else left to give. That afternoon, I returned to the bedroom closet. The fireproof safe sat where it always did, steady beneath the linen shelves. I opened it and placed a fresh folder inside, labeled Estate Final Copy. Every version of my will, notarized and sealed. The insurance paperwork. Even the small index card with Cora's emergency contact info. I stared at the contents for a moment before closing the lid. The click of the lock felt heavier than usual. I suppose that's the sound of letting go. In the days that followed, I started letting light back into the house. I pulled the curtains wide each morning and opened windows I hadn't touched since the start of spring. I found the old tablecloth Gerald loved, blue with tiny embroidered lemons along the edges, and spread it across the kitchen table. I took down the framed photo of Marcus that used to sit in the hallway and replaced it with a painting Cora made in college. Watercolor. Quiet hills and morning sky. Even the air felt different. Not new, but newly mine. Then, on Thursday, Cora came. I hadn't asked her to, I hadn't told her about the email, but I suppose when the door finally opens between people, kindness knows how to walk in on its own. She brought muffins, lemon poppy seed, still warm from the drive. I didn't want to come empty-handed, she said, placing the basket down gently. You've done enough of that for other people. I didn't argue, just motioned to the chair by the window. We sat there for almost an hour, without rushing through words. She told me about her job, grant writing for a community health program, how she'd started painting again, how she was thinking of moving out of the city, maybe somewhere quieter, with room for a garden. You'd be good at that, I said, making something grow. She looked at me then, more directly than most people do. You already did. The words hit somewhere soft, unexpected. I turned slightly toward the window, pretending to check the light, but she didn't let the moment go awkward. I read your letter again, she added, the one about the will. I didn't respond properly the first time. I was surprised, that's all, humbled. You were always watching, I said, even when no one thought to thank you. She nodded, and in that shared quiet, something settled between us. Not obligation, not guilt, just a thread, sturdy and woven with recognition. I want to come by more often, she said before standing. And if you ever want to visit the community garden I help with, there's a bench in the back with your name on it. Is that a figure of speech? She smiled. For now. When she left, she hugged me. Not the tight kind meant to make up for absence, the kind that fits who you've become, not who someone wants you to be. After she drove away, I sat back down at the table. No laptop, no documents, no ledger of debt or proof. Just sunlight stretching across lemon-stitched cotton. I leaned back, eyes steady, and let it warm my face. The donation truck arrived early Saturday morning. 2 men in navy shirts rolled down the ramp and nodded politely when I opened the garage. You the one who called about the household goods? The older one asked. I nodded. Mostly tools and supplies, some office things, all boxed and labeled. They loaded the items quickly. Quiet, efficient. No questions about why someone might be giving up so much. No curiosity about whose name might have once been scrawled in the margins of those folders or etched into the metal casing of rusted hand tools. I didn't offer an explanation. Some burdens are better moved without words. When they finished, One of them handed me a carbon copy of the donation form. "Thank you," he said. "Not the kind of thank you that expects a return. Just the kind people give when they understand that letting go costs something, even if the weight is physical." I stood in the garage a moment longer after they left. The echo of space felt unfamiliar. For years, this room had been a resting place for Marcus's projects, Gerald's repairs, and my silence. Now, only dust motes caught the morning light. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. Later that afternoon, I drove to the post office with one more box, the one I'd marked for Cora. I had added a letter the night before, just a few lines written on the back of an old recipe card. "Dear Cora, this house held more than its share of things not said. I don't want that for you. These are just objects, but they belong to someone who once believed in beginnings. May you use them to create what no one else gets to take away from you." I mailed it express, not because it was urgent, but because I didn't want to give myself time to second-guess the gesture. On the drive back, I passed the old office building Marcus once leased, the one I'd unknowingly co-signed for. The windows were covered in brown paper now. The nameplate was gone. A small sign in the corner read, "Space available." I didn't slow down, but I did glance once in the mirror, just long enough to note how something once so imposing had become forgettable. That's the thing about hollow structures. They don't fall loudly. They just stop mattering.
Sits.
When I got home, there was a letter in the mailbox. Real paper, handwritten, no return address. The moment I saw the slant of the writing, I knew. Marcus. I carried it inside, set it on the table, and stared at it for 10 minutes before opening it. Inside, the writing was uneven, less practiced, more raw. "Mom, I know it's too late for explanations, but maybe it's not too late for understanding. I didn't start out trying to hurt you. It just got away from me. The loans, the cards, the lies. I kept thinking if I could fix one thing, maybe it would all unravel in reverse. I know you think I used you. Maybe I did, but I also needed you. Not just for the business, for the belief. I'm not writing to ask for money or forgiveness. I'm just writing because for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to understand how far off the rails I went. You were the last line, and I crossed it. I don't expect anything, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry, not because I lost, but because you had to carry it." Marcus? I read it once, then folded it shut. It wasn't an apology for what he did. It was an apology for what I felt. Still, I suppose that was a beginning of something, though what? I couldn't yet say. I placed the letter in a drawer with no label. Some truths don't belong in categories. That evening, I sat in the yard. The sun had dropped low, and the wind carried the first hints of summer: cut grass, warmed pavement, the faint perfume of someone grilling 2 doors down. I ran my fingers over the edge of the armrest on the old wooden chair Gerald built the summer after his retirement. He'd sanded it smooth with the same hands that once changed Marcus's diapers, held my waist during slow dances, repaired broken stair rails before I even noticed they'd warped. It was the kind of craftsmanship meant to outlast memory. And yet, here I was, remembering, not the ache, not the arguments, just the ordinary beauty of a man who did what he said he would. Behind me, the house stood still, soft lit by the porch bulb I'd finally replaced. It didn't look different, but I knew better. Its walls no longer held withheld words. The rooms no longer echoed with names spoken in anger. It wasn't about erasing history. It was about reclaiming space. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. The debt wasn't mine anymore. Not the financial one. Not the emotional one. Not the soul-wearing weight of waiting for someone to see you as something other than useful.
Yeah.
When I opened my eyes, the first star had appeared in the sky. I whispered something only the dark could hear. Let him fix it or fall trying. Then I rose, returned inside, and turned off every light but the one in the kitchen window. The house no longer waited for anyone. And neither did I. On Monday, the bank called. It was a courtesy, not a warning. A woman named Cheryl introduced herself, soft voice, slight drawl. She asked if I had a few minutes to go over a flagged account. I told her I did, though I already had a feeling what it was about. There was an attempt to access an old business-linked line of credit last Friday, she explained. The credentials used were outdated, and the attempt was blocked, but your name is still technically attached on an archival level. I know you filed revocations, but they haven't fully cycled through the old digital systems. Let me guess, I said. Marcus? Her pause confirmed it before she spoke. We can't say definitively, but the IP address traces to a location 1 block from his last known business address. It didn't surprise me, not anymore, but it did sting, like brushing up against a bruise you'd thought had faded. I'll have my lawyer forward the final confirmations again, I said, and I want a written statement that my liability has been manually voided from any legacy systems. Of course, I'm sorry you're going through this. I thanked her, politely, and hung up. Then I just sat there, not angry, not even disappointed, just still. It reminded me of when Gerald was first diagnosed. That slow awareness that what's broken may not kill you, but it won't repair itself either. The part of you that begins, quietly, to plan a life beyond the shape you'd once believed was permanent. So Madison, au revoir. I spent the rest of the morning going through my digital files, deleting old cloud links, re-encrypting financial folders, changing the passwords I'd lazily recycled for a decade, the ones Marcus knew. By midday, the inbox was clean, the browser history cleared, and every document bearing both our names now had one of them crossed out for good. The house was quiet, not the oppressive kind, but purposeful, intentional. At 3 o'clock, I made myself a late lunch, just a bowl of lentils and the end of a rosemary roll. I stood at the sink after, rinsing the bowl while watching a blue jay dart through the lemon tree just beyond the kitchen window. I had never noticed how its branches curved inward, as if protecting something at its center. It wasn't until I saw that shape that I realized what I needed to do next. An hour later, I opened the drawer where I kept the safe key and retrieved the folder marked Legal Backups. I flipped through the pages until I found the document I hadn't touched since the beginning. My own credit application from the year after Gerald died. The one Marcus had offered to review before I submitted it. It had my signature, but in a pen I never used, black ink, not the deep blue I preferred. The forgery wasn't egregious, just subtle enough to go unnoticed, but now, with everything that had happened, I saw it clearly. He'd started earlier than I thought. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because there was no part of me left willing to grieve someone who kept choosing the same patterns. I pulled out a sticky note and wrote 3 words in small block print. Do not trust. I placed it over that signature, folded the document, and placed it in an envelope labeled historical only. Then I slid it into the safe, buried behind everything else, not for the courts, not for confrontation, just for truth. By dusk, the sky had turned violet, the kind of purple that creeps in quietly, without ceremony. I wrapped myself in a shawl and stepped out onto the porch. The wind was soft, brushing against the silk at my temples. The scarf stayed in place, but the ends fluttered lightly at my collarbone. I held a mug of tea in one hand, still warm, and leaned back in Gerald's chair. The neighbor across the street was sweeping her driveway, her broom moving in practiced arcs. I raised a hand. She waved back, simple, human. I thought of all the years I'd spent making myself smaller to keep peace, that never came. Thought of all the birthdays, the quiet favors, the conversations I'd tried to start, and then swallowed back whole. Now, there was nothing more to shrink for. If Marcus ever called again, I'd answer, not out of obligation, but clarity. If he showed up at the door, I'd open it, only far enough to see his face, only long enough to say, I don't carry your debt anymore.
Disrupted, no!
I stayed on the porch until the stars reappeared. One by one, they stitched themselves into the dark fabric of the sky, no fanfare, no noise, just light returning to its place. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to check the lock on the front door, not because I trusted the world, but because I trusted myself. And that was more than enough. The letter came on a Tuesday. Not a handwritten one like before. This one arrived in a plain white envelope, the type with machine-creased edges and a barcode printed along the bottom. Official, cold. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the table while I made tea, set out 2 slices of rye to toast, and watched the morning light creep across the floor. But it stared back at me the whole time, flat, unmoving, like a sealed judgment. When I finally slit the envelope open, I wasn't surprised to see legal letterhead. A notice of intent to dispute ownership of assets. Marcus had filed for a hearing. Not criminal, not even civil, not yet, but a formal request to challenge the dissolution of our shared financial history. He claimed I had acted in bad faith, that I had cut him out of his rightful share in business assets he had built under familial trust. I read the document 3 times, each sentence carefully crafted to twist my boundaries into betrayal, to suggest that my silence, my patience, my hesitation had somehow been consent. It was strategic, measured, and dishonest, but not unfamiliar. This was Marcus at his most dangerous, not angry, not explosive, but polished, the same voice he used when he wanted a bank loan or a second chance, the voice that asked me to sign things I didn't fully read. I didn't cry. Not this time. I took the letter to the kitchen, placed it beneath a glass paperweight on the counter, and poured my tea. Then I picked up the phone. David answered after 2 rings. "Anna," he said. No small talk. I saw the filing. "So he's serious." "And he's grasping," David said. "But that doesn't mean it can't get messy." He explained the process, that Marcus's claim would require a response within 10 days, that while the assets were dissolved cleanly, the narrative could be challenged, at least enough to force arbitration. I listened. I asked the right questions. I took notes in my spiral-bound notebook, like I was back in a high school civics class. And then I said, the thing that changed the tone of the conversation, "I'm not afraid of him anymore." David was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said finally. "Then let's put this to bed properly." Sat. What's one life? That afternoon, I returned to the safe beneath my bed. I pulled the folder marked historical only, opened it, and removed the forged credit application, the one Marcus had filled in years ago, in black ink I never used. I had no intention of weaponizing it. But if he wanted to challenge truth with half facts, I would answer him with the whole picture. I placed the document in a new folder, Response Evidence, May. I added the folder to the satchel I would bring to David's office tomorrow. The final weight of it wasn't in the paper. It was in the decision to carry nothing else but facts.
So violating.
That night, I couldn't sleep, again. But this time, I didn't wander. I didn't pace the hallway or wash dishes that were already clean. I just lay there in the dark, listening to the old rhythm of the house. I imagined Marcus sitting with his own lawyer, shaping stories, reciting timelines edited by memory and ego. I wondered if he believed what he was doing, or if belief was never the point, just preservation. And then I thought of Gerald. How, in the final months, he'd insisted on cleaning out the garage himself. Not because he needed to, he could barely lift the boxes by then, but because he said no man should leave behind a mess someone else would have to sort through. "What you leave matters less than how you leave it," he'd told me once, bent over a cracked toolbox, hands trembling with effort. I had done everything I could to leave this house clean, emotionally and otherwise. If Marcus wanted to kick up dust now, let him. He'd find I was not the same woman who once nodded through his half-truths. By the next morning, I was at David's office by 8:45. The satchel in my lap felt solid, intentional, like it belonged to someone who knew the value of a name. David greeted me in the conference room with 2 cups of coffee and a yellow legal pad already filled with notes. "We're not going to war," he said. "We're just going to write a closing chapter that can't be edited." I handed him the forged document. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing, just added it to the pile. When we finished drafting the response, he looked across the table and asked, "You sure you want to go through with this?" I nodded. He already burned the bridge. I'm just making sure it doesn't float back. David smiled at that, small, tired, approving. "Then we're done here. I'll file this today." Back at home, the house welcomed me with its usual hush. I put the satchel back in the closet and changed into my gardening shoes. I hadn't touched the lemon tree in a week, and its roots were beginning to crowd the surface of the pot. I knelt on the porch, pulled the gloves over my hands, and began digging gently around the base. Soil loosened. The scent of citrus and earth rose like memory. I trimmed away the excess root, careful not to harm the core, and pressed fresh soil around the trunk. My hands moved with purpose, steady, practiced. It wasn't symbolic. It was just something that needed doing. But still, as I stood and wiped the sweat from my brow, I realized that nothing in my life had ever grown without some form of cutting back. Sometimes even love had to be pruned. And this time, I wasn't afraid of what might never grow back. 3 days after David submitted our formal response, the clouds rolled in, not metaphorically, real clouds, thick and slate-colored, pressing low against the rooftops like something unfinished. Rain didn't fall yet, but the air shifted. The wind moved slower. People spoke quieter at the market, as if waiting for something to break. I spent most of the day inside. Not out of anxiety, but from the kind of weariness that only settles when a long-held burden has been set down. My body didn't ache, but it was still adjusting to its own freedom. Mid-afternoon, I pulled out the storage tin from the cabinet above the fridge. It held recipes, most yellowed, handwritten, some barely legible after years of flour dust and grease stains. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wanted to be near the part of myself that once baked without needing a reason. Tucked between two recipe cards, Gerald's pie crust and my mother's pickled onions, was a blank envelope I didn't recognize. It wasn't sealed. The paper felt newer than the others, crisp along the fold. Inside was a letter I had written months ago but never mailed. To Marcus. Marcus, I don't know when you started seeing me as a convenience or when I stopped calling it what it was. I only know that somewhere between your charm and my quiet, you learned how to take, and I forgot how to say no. I signed papers I shouldn't have. I gave you the benefit of the doubt long after you stopped deserving it, and for that, I'm as responsible as you are. Not for what you did, but for how long I let it shape me. This isn't vengeance, it's reclamation. You can build something new, you can start again, but it won't be on my name, and it won't be in my silence. Mom. I sat with the letter in my lap for a while, unsure what to do with it. It was no longer necessary. My actions had said everything this letter tried to. But still, the ink felt honest, and for the first time, I didn't flinch reading my own disappointment. Eventually, I refolded the page and placed it in the middle of the kitchen table. Not to mail it, to honor it. Later that night, the rain finally arrived. Not loud, not sudden, just a steady curtain of sound, softening the world outside. I turned off all the lights except one lamp in the corner of the living room and sat with my tea, listening. It's strange what becomes audible when you stop filling the room with words, how the walls creak in different tones, how your own breath settles into something calmer. I thought about Marcus, not as a threat, not even as a son, just as a man I once knew more clearly when he was 5 years old than I did when he turned 40. That's the strange cruelty of parenthood. The longer you know them, the more you sometimes lose them. But I also thought about the other truth. The one I'd spent weeks coming to terms with. That survival doesn't require reconciliation. It only requires self-respect. By morning, the rain had stopped. The air was bright and clean, and the lemon tree looked relieved, droplets clinging to its leaves like quiet declarations. I made a full breakfast for the first time in months. Eggs, toast, roasted tomato halves. I even added a sprinkle of dill from the kitchen window planter. It wasn't celebration, just nourishment, a recognition that peace also needs feeding. As I ate, I looked at the letter still sitting on the table, and then, without ceremony, I slid it into a drawer next to my old wedding ring and a faded photograph of Gerald. Not everything needed to be burned or mailed or filed away for a judge. Some things were meant to remain within reach, unchanged, unresolved, but no longer dangerous.
So say you!
That afternoon, Cora arrived without calling first. She knocked gently, then stepped back like she always did, giving space. I was in the area, she said, lifting a small paper bag. Thought I'd bring by some of that bread you liked. I invited her in, poured tea, and sliced the loaf while she talked about her new apartment. Top floor, creaky floors, generous light. We didn't talk about Marcus. She didn't ask. I didn't offer. Instead, we talked about where to plant spring bulbs, about the bakery down the street that had finally reopened under new owners, about how certain kinds of loneliness don't go away, they just stop hurting. Before she left, she pulled something from her coat pocket, a small notebook with a cloth cover. It's just a sketch journal, she said. No pressure, but I figured you have space now. Maybe some stories deserve a second voice. I thanked her, my hands closing over the gift more tightly than I meant to. After she left, I sat by the window with the notebook in my lap. The cover was soft, textured, something between canvas and memory. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I stared out at the yard. The leaves were just beginning to yellow. The air smelled of what comes after rain, earth, roots, and the permission to begin again. I reached for a pen, not because I needed to write anything urgent, but because the stillness was no longer something to defend against. It was something to write from.